Okay, great. I think we'll get started. Okay. All right, welcome everyone. We are happy you could join us for Heather's presentation tonight. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation, my name is Jennifer Grisky. I'm the Administrative Office Manager for the Trust, and the majority of our organization are volunteers. So we definitely rely on most of our volunteers, and then I work part-time. There is a lot of information about us on our About page on the website. We advocate for and educate about historic properties, places, districts in Madison. We wanted to quickly note that Heather's giving this presentation, Jason is giving the part 2, which I'm sure most people know already, and then we will have a part 3, which we're still in the works creating, that is going to talk about First Nations. So look for that coming soon. We'll have a date for that, and then same thing, it'll be free tickets, you can register, and it'll be on Zoom again. So watch out for that. A couple housekeeping items. Everyone's muted. After Heather's presentation, we will take that off. You guys can unmute yourselves and ask questions, ask away. And if you'd prefer not to ask a question, you can always put it in the chat. There's a chat button if you're on your computer at the bottom of your screen where you can click in there and you can send it to us and we can ask too. Either way. I think many of you are familiar with Heather Bailey, who's the Madison's preservation planner, and Heather, so I don't take up too much of your time, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you so much for having me. Let me get over to share the screen. Okay, so, oh, I'm sorry, technology. So what we're here tonight to talk about is Madison's Underrepresented Communities Historic Resources Survey. Oh, and it helps if I'm clicking on the right thing, you know. So the reason why we did this survey is we were looking at doing our first citywide historic preservation plan. We've had quite a few historic preservation plans in the past, but we're looking at, let's do one that deals with the entire city, and it's time for us to get down and do this. But with that, it coincided with the City of Madison has their Racial Equity and Social Justice Initiative that is a training that is available particularly for staff. And staff was going through that training and thinking about the historic preservation program and what we have in terms of our inventory. And if we were looking at the full and rich history of Madison, what we were identifying and documenting was not telling that full story. And that's true of anywhere in the United States. So a lot of preservation programs are going through this. With us going through and taking a look at our program with the preservation plan, what we wanted to have as a foundational piece was a survey of some of these underrepresented communities, with the knowledge that the survey that we were going to do was just going to have to be a starting point. We weren't going to be able to do it all. So we had as our purpose that we wanted to diversify the stories that we preserve and look at the properties that we are preserving and making sure that we are being purposeful in telling the full story of Madison. So I've also got I've got the racial equity and social justice tool that the city uses. We use that as part of looking at our communication strategy for the preservation plan. But also one of the pieces that was really informing what the city was doing was a piece from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, talking about when does it become social justice? When does preservation become social justice? So for the process for the survey, a lot of surveys, if you're doing historic preservation work, you identify a geographic area and you go through, do a reconnaissance survey, or what we call windshield survey, because you're driving around in your car, you can take a look and say, oh, that building looks like it's got a lot of historic integrity, I mean, it's still got a lot of historic fabric. Let's take a look at what's out there, and then you go and you do your research, see if you can find something about the area, or you have a particular theme. With this, we said, we're going to identify communities that just off the top of our heads, we know these communities in particular are not well represented in our preservation files, in our record. So we went with the social history route first, developed a context for each of those communities, and then went out and did the survey to see, are any of these properties that were associated with these histories, are any of them still around? And there were difficulties. Internally, as we were talking about this process with the staff, one of the folks was saying that we weren't turning up a lot of properties, and sort of how disappointing that was. And I said, well, I think that's not surprising. One of the things with underrepresented communities, the way the systems are set up, is very particular people going through certain things. So we're talking about largely wealthy, male, and white. The systems that are set up document these types of people and the work that they do. So these underrepresented communities aren't just underrepresented in the stories that the City of Madison is telling, they're also underrepresented in the historical record. So doing archival research is very difficult because those stories oftentimes are not there. Luckily enough, there's been this wave of publications. We, of course, have an amazing state historical society, and they've been sponsoring a lot of these publications looking at these different communities. And with that, though, we have really great community connections and stakeholders and people with a deep knowledge of their communities. So lots of oral histories or personal interviews, mining the information that's out there, and then going out and meeting with people, talking with people, and taking a look at the sites. So for the communities that we were looking at for our first go around were African Americans, First Nations, Hmong, Latino, I'll talk about why we noted it that way, LGBTQ, and women. These are not the only underrepresented communities. One of the other key components of this survey was that we wanted this to be a living document. So lots of discussions back and forth. Part of the details with us adopting our historic preservation plan was that the underrepresented communities survey would be accepted as a living document so that it can continue to evolve. So as we are able to get more information, do another wave of both with the communities that we've already identified, but additional communities, and start building those historic contexts and gathering together that information, that we can do a better job of telling a more complete story of Madison. So results of the survey, I've got a clip there of what the cover of the survey looks like. And this is a sort of internal document, so it doesn't have a pretty cover, it's pretty functional. So we identified 117 resources of historical interest. And notice that says resources and not necessarily properties, because we were looking at more than just individual properties. There's categories in there related to art, and so there's sculptures and things like that that are related to different communities. So those are resources and not necessarily a property, so that more sort of traditional approach. 98 of the resources that we found were potentially eligible as Madison landmarks. 9 of those potentially individually eligible to the state and national register of historic places. 39 of those were already designated as Madison landmarks. And one of the things that we want to do as a result of this survey work is one of the deliverables from the survey were documentation for each of these identified properties, and we will add them to our preservation files. And of course, those are publicly available. People pretty frequently email me and say, hey, do you have any information on such and such file? We also, for planning purposes, use the preservation files to inform us about what's going on with the property. Is there redevelopment that's going to happen here? Is there any known historic associations with this property? And by having more complete preservation files, I can give a more complete answer. So the city can understand what we're approving and how we are interacting with our properties and with our histories. With the ones that are already designated landmarks, one of the thoughts is that we update the landmark designation, the nomination, so that we are addressing an additional area of significance, so that it's not just a sort of sidebar history, these aren't sidebar histories. These are another layer of history that is just as important. And so we're talking about amending landmark designations to add in this additional layer of history that we didn't have before. With this survey also, we were looking at properties that were not just 50 years old, which tend to be the way that most historic preservation identifies as what is historic, what has stood the test of time. If it's been around for 50 years, there's a chance it might be around for 50 more. But if you do a survey just starting at the 50 years old, then it's outdated almost as soon as you have it. So the survey was looking at properties that were at least 40 years old, but included some that are more recent than that, with the idea that we didn't necessarily have enough context in terms of standing the test of time to be able to decide whether or not these resources would be eligible for a historic designation. But we're gathering together documentation so that you know, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we can revisit that and say, you know what, yes, this is something we have better context in terms of a period of time. Let's talk about making this a landmark. Or by gathering together all the information on these properties, there are a variety of other things that people can do with this information. And again, it's publicly available information. People can do walking tours, mine this information for various purposes. Also with that though, some of the addresses are currently restricted. So we have a redacted version of this survey that we are about to make publicly available. For some of the more recent history, the properties that we're identifying are people's homes, and these people are still alive and they still live there. So publishing something that says, you know, hey, this person is significant and here's where they live, that was something that we didn't want to do. So we have those address locations restricted. We know where they are, and so we have an unredacted version. And you know, at some point in the future, then that can become publicly available information, trying to, you know, protect people's personal property locations. So digging into, I'm supposed to speak to the 3 different of our underrepresented communities. So the African American community, Hmong community, and Latino community. So I'm going to talk through a couple of histories related to these communities, and then come back through to what the city is thinking about doing with the information that we have. So one of the properties associated with the African American community is the Capital City Masonic Lodge number 2. And I'm going to read through a section from this particular property information. Capital City Masonic Lodge 2 of the Prince Hall Free and Accepted Masons, an exclusively African American lodge. And the Prince Hall Freemasons, there's a long history with that. This is a separate African American order of Masons. Was established along with a women's auxiliary in Madison in 1906. The organization had a small membership at the time and likely congregated at the extant Douglas Beneficial Society Hall at 649 to 653 East Dayton Street, or the non-extant Old St. Paul Methodist Episcopal Church on East Dayton Street. The Madison Lodge officially chartered in 1925. The Capital City Masonic Lodge 2 eventually congregated at 100 North Blair Street, and that's the picture we have up here on the slide. Congregated at 100 North Blair Street by the 1960s. The Colonial Revival style building was designed by architect A.H. Beckham for the Free Methodist Church in 1940. The lodge continues to use the building to this day. And this is, they're a very active order. They have a website, and you can go learn some more information about who they are and what they do. Capital City Masonic Lodge number 2, so this property, is locally significant to the African American community in the area of social and political movements. These fraternal orders were particularly important during the civil rights movement. So from 1906 to the present. During this period, several resources have been associated with it. It is likely 1906 to circa 1960 meeting places, the non-extant Old St. Paul Methodist Episcopal Church on East Dayton, and the Douglas Beneficial Society Hall, John and Amanda Hill Grocery, which is already a designated Madison landmark, at 649 to 653 Dayton Street, and it's circa 1960 to present day lodge at 100 North Blair Street. Primary resource associated with the significance in social and political movements is this property. So I think this is, you go by this building, you see the plaque that is there on the side of the building. But I think it's important for us to be able to share this wider story for this area of the city that is the older remaining largely African-American neighborhood that was established in the city. Moving on to a person, so not just going from a purely property focus, but looking at a person. So Eugene Parks. Now, let me get to my information sheet so I can speak a little bit more eloquently. Eugene Parks was born in 1947 on the south side of Madison to Roger and Pearline Parks, who had come to Madison from Georgia in the 1940s and became prominent figures in the city's African-American community. He graduated from La Follette High School in 1965 and attended the University of Wisconsin. He ran unsuccessfully as a candidate for Dane County Sheriff. Parks became the associate editor of the Madison Sun and an outspoken proponent of the civil rights in Madison. In 1969, Parks became the first Black alderperson for the Madison Common Council at the age of 22. He was the first person of color to be elected to public office in Madison and Dane County. He represented the 14th Ward in South Madison and was known as someone who challenged the system and fought for justice. In 1973, the Madison Metropolitan School District adopted an affirmative action policy, and Alderman Parks spoke extensively before the school board, arguing that minority candidates were often overlooked and unaware of job openings. In 1974, Eugene Parks ran unsuccessfully on the Democratic ticket for Secretary of State. From 1975 to 1979, Parks worked as the staff director for the State Senator Monroe Swan and was the president of the Madison chapter of the NAACP. In 1979, Parks was appointed an administrative assistant to Fire Chief Ed Durkin, and in 1985, he became the director of the City of Madison's Affirmative Action Department. In 1988, Parks was reprimanded and suspended for calling an MATC board member a racist, liar, and coward at a meeting. Parks filed a racial discrimination claim and was fired. In 1989, Parks filed a circuit court action to regain his position and was given a job as a sign shop supervisor in the traffic engineering department of the city. In 1995, a court of appeals ruled that Parks was illegally fired in 1988, and the city settled with him for $441,000. In the 1990s, Eugene took over the family business of Mr. P's restaurant, located at 1616 Bell Street, from his father. In 1996, Mr. P's closed. In 1999, and again in 2003, he ran unsuccessfully for mayor. Eugene Parks died in 2005. In 2016, Madison 365 began an annual awards in his honor, the Eugene Parks Disruption Award, for those who challenge the system and are fighting for justice. Eugene Parks is locally significant in the African American community in the area of government from 1969 to 1995. During this time period, there were several resources associated with him. The City County Building at 210 Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, so I've got a picture of that up here on the slide. And his residence from 6608 Berkshire Road. And the primary source associated with the life of Gene Parks and his significance in government is the City and County Building. I think talking about Eugene Parks and the properties associated with him is both an opportunity to talk about a really inspiring figure in the African American community and an opportunity to talk about difficult and uncomfortable stories. The city was not the good actor in this story, and I think it is important on the part of the city to face that head on, and let's talk about this and hopefully have learned from it. This is pretty recent history for an action of this sort to have happened. One of the other things before I shift off from talking about what we learned in the survey of African American related resources is in the context we talk through and organizations, movements, and people that are significant to Madison's history who were African American. And for some of them, there aren't any properties remaining associated with them. So I suppose most folks in Madison know that Eston Hemmings, who changed his name when he moved here to Jefferson, was the son of Thomas Jefferson by Sally Hemings. And the only resource we have relating to him is his grave. He had several children, one of whom, Beverly, was very influential in early transportation in the city. And again, we don't really have any resources related to this person. I value both having that history there, but also finding that we weren't purposeful in preserving any properties related to these people. And I think that is a lesson for us to learn so that we are more deliberate in the properties that we save in the future. So going for a property that is able to bridge multiple of these communities. Oh, sorry, switching between documents here. So neighborhood community center is significant to both the Hmong, Latino, and African American communities. This neighborhood house community center, the number of growing immigrant families settling in the Greenbush neighborhood, Italian immigrants especially, encouraged the proposal of a settlement house to address their needs. Helen Dexter and Associated Charities, a social work organization, founded a community house there in 1916. Established along the traditional lines of a settlement house, the neighborhood house was intended as a gateway for those immigrating to the area or those who need support along the way to becoming a part of the local society and economy. The 1916 location, supported by influential and wealthy Madisonians, was located in a non-extant building at 807 Mound Street. The organization moved to a non-extant building at 25 South Park Street the following year and was officially named the Neighborhood House. It offered a variety of clubs and classes to the community and quickly became a popular location. Well over 200 people a month used its services. In 1920, the neighborhood house moved again to a non-extant storefront at 768 West Washington Avenue across from Brittingham Park. The institution continued to be supported by local Madison clubs. The neighborhood house expanded with a large addition in 1926 and continued to grow in the scale of its mission. During the Depression years, the focus of the institution shifted from language and citizen courses to providing services to all community members, including soup kitchens, social work, job postings, and the Better Homes and Gardens Club. During the 1950s, Neighborhood House was put under the auspices of the Madison Neighborhood Centers organization through the City of Madison, which also included the South Madison Neighborhood Center. Urban renewal efforts in the 1950s targeted the triangle area of East Park Street and South Regent Street for demolition and redevelopment. The 1958 Triangle Plan, which would come to fruition 2 years later, included the demolition of the Neighborhood House Community Center and its surrounding neighborhood. The community center raised funds to build a new home 1 block west of its previous location in 1965. The new international style building at 29 South Mill Street, and that's what we've got up here, cost $200,000 to construct and is organized with a gymnasium in the center and offices and classrooms around the periphery of the 1-story building. A new wave of immigration in the 1960s gave the neighborhood house a new purpose, and it began to provide English courses and job training again. The Neighborhood House Community Center has continued with its mission to the present. The Neighborhood House Community Center has served a wide variety of groups since its establishment, including, but not limited to, African Americans, Italians, Jews, Latinos and Latinas, and Hmong. Beginning in the mid-1970s, with the earliest Hmong refugees arriving in Madison, the Neighborhood House Community Center helped to find housing, employment, and childcare, as well as provide after-school programs for new Hmong residents and families. The center also provided opportunities for Hmong immigrants to practice and share cultural traditions, art, and food. Its location was particularly convenient for the relatively large number of Hmong residents at the nearby Bayview Foundation Apartments. The Neighborhood House Community Center is locally significant to the African American and Hmong communities in the area of social and political movements from 1965 to the present. During its history, 4 resources have been associated with the neighborhood house, and they're all gone except for this one. But this is a good example of a more recent history and a link to the Hmong community. And this is a history, of course, that is still ongoing, but good for us to document now. So shifting over to someone more recent, because the Hmong context and Hmong community is a much more recent phenomenon, the Hmong refugees largely started coming to Madison in the 1970s. So this is, let me say, an ongoing, growing and developing history. So one person related to developing the Hmong historic context and the survey was Shua Vang. Let me read the bit of history that is there in the context in the survey report. The late 1980s and early 1990s was a period when new Hmong residents in Madison demonstrated their resilience in overcoming the dramatic cultural differences of their new home. Hmong public school counselor characterized the trend as learning to live in 2 cultures and succeed in both. Education had become an important force in the development of the Hmong community. Hmong women were enrolling in colleges and universities and obtaining advanced degrees. Hmong immigrants in nearby cities, St. Paul, Minnesota, and La Crosse, Wisconsin, broke barriers by getting elected to public offices. The first Hmong Madisonian to win public office was elected in 2001, and that was Shua Vang, who was elected to the school board, and that was called a breakthrough step for the Hmong community. He was elected to a second 3-year term in 2004. And another sign that they were integrating well with a foreign economic system, Hmong immigrants purchased homes at a dramatically increased rate in the 1990s. So you'll see here in the slide, I don't have any pictures associated because we're in part protecting information. And I've got a note here, address restricted. This is the history related to this person is very recent, 2001 and 2004 in terms of history and significance to Madison. So that is something that we are going to keep in our files, as this person is significant to Madison and to the Hmong community. And we will then be purposeful about how we interact with this property and continue to document and add to the information that we already have, as you know, history is ever changing and ongoing. So shifting over to the Latino context, and this seems like a good opportunity to talk about the way we have our notation there. In doing the preservation plan, one of the things we got into a discussion about with the Historic Preservation Plan Advisory Committee was, what do we call this community? There are a lot of different opinions, and we reached out to our Civil Rights Department and said, we were going to use Latinx. Is this a good term to apply to this community? Or should we be looking at something else? And they said, well, you know, this is a diverse community of people, and there is no one answer. There is a lot of competing opinion. What the committee came down to was that Latinx seems to be a label that English-speaking communities apply to that particular demographic, and it isn't necessarily a term that people who are members of that community would apply to themselves. So where we ended up was doing a Latino/A, so that it wasn't gender specific, but also something that people from that community, it fits into their language and into Spanish and is recognizable. And so, yeah, there was a long discussion about this, but this is where we ended up. So that's why we have the additional notation there. So long context to get to the Cardinal Bar and Ricardo Gonzalez. The Cardinal Hotel was originally constructed in 1908, and the bar on the first floor was completed in 1912. After moving to Madison the prior year to accept a position as an affirmative action officer, Ricardo Gonzalez took ownership of the struggling Cardinal Bar in 1974. Gonzalez quickly became part of Madison's active and vocal Cuban community. He was also a gay man, active in Madison's LGBTQ community, and intended to run Cardinal Bar as a gay bar. However, the Cardinal Bar soon became popular with a diverse clientele, including the LGBTQ and Latino communities, among others. Gonzalez was politically active in the community, and therefore the bar became an informal headquarters for many political actions in Madison during the 1970s and 1980s. It was the venue for campaign fundraisers for gay and lesbian political candidates, as well as fundraisers for LGBTQ organizations and causes. Gonzalez was elected alderman of the 4th District in 1989, becoming the first gay Latino elected to public office in the United States. In 1981, a series of violent incidents occurred in the bar, accompanied by damage from fire and flooding. These events nearly took the Cardinal Bar under. The bar closed briefly, but reopened again. The bar was remodeled in 1985 and 1986. After 43 years in operation, making it the longest running gay bar in Madison's history and likely the longest running Latino-owned enterprise in Madison's history too, the Cardinal Bar closed in 2017 and was sold. The Cardinal Bar is locally significant in both the Latino and LGBTQ communities in the area of commerce, particularly goods and services, from 1974 to 2017. The Cardinal Hotel is already designated as a City of Madison landmark. Consideration should be given to updating its designation to include its contribution to history of underrepresented communities. I think there's, again, layers of important history that are going with this property that was already designated as a landmark, but now we have a fuller understanding of its significance, and it is a story that we can make more widely available. Going over to La Comunidad News. The Spanish language newspaper, La Comunidad News, was founded in 1989 by Dante Vizcarra and his parents, Rafael and Gladys Vizcarra, as the first Spanish language newspaper in the state of Wisconsin. The paper was established as a conscious effort to engage Latinos and Latinas in the state. The paper had several names, including La Nación, before settling on La Comunidad, and has addressed wider national issues facing Latinos and Latinas in the context of local events in Madison. The paper also caters to all Spanish speakers in the wider community, including, but not limited to, Native and immigrant Mexicans, Colombians, and Cubans. La Comunidad News has operated in a converted minimal traditional style house located at 912 Dane Street, adjacent to the Burr Oaks neighborhood on the south side of Madison. Though currently located in the town of Madison, this portion of the town of Madison is expected to be annexed into the city of Madison in the future. La Comunidad News at 912 Dane Street is locally significant to the Latina community in the area of commerce from 1989 to the present. So this is a good resource for, again, thinking about in the future. It's not currently in the city of Madison, it's in the town of Madison. But it is a property that we need to be conscious of, particularly as we are moving towards annexation of this area of the town of Madison. So shifting to information that we gathered for the resources, one of the things that is in the survey report are maps. Planners like maps. So I've got up here a couple of different maps showing the locations of resources, because it does help identify when different communities were grouped in particular neighborhoods. And of course, with the history of redlining that ended up creating physical segregation in cities like Madison, there were groupings of people that, whether they chose to live there or not, this is where they were able to live. So here we have, for the properties identified as part of the survey, we have African American resources, and I can't see what this says. So I'm assuming this is for the Hmong resources, because that was the order that I put things in. And you're able to see for this one, really, there's a very tight grouping. There's a couple of outlier resources, but really we're talking about downtown. And the Latino community, again, sort of spread a little bit around, grouping really downtown and down on the south side. I want to go back up to the African American community. You're able to see some resources in the East Dayton corridor, that is the older African American neighborhood, and other places around, including on campus. And then Southside shows up, and then where Greenbush, really was, and to a certain extent still is, you can see the effects of urban renewal, and that we don't have a lot of dots there. A lot of those places we've lost. So getting down to how can you access this survey, which I've said is going to be available to the public. So I've just received in and approved the final deliverables. There's lots of bureaucratic stuff to do with compiling together all this stuff. The planning division has on our website, and so I've got the little header up there, a place where we have plans. And so the historic preservation plan will be under the category for the citywide plans. It's also our neighborhood plans are there. But if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of that webpage, there's an area that says studies and reports. And those are, we've got white papers and other stuff that help inform what we're doing. So of note to folks interested in historic properties, there's the Langdon Neighborhood Character Study is located there. But I've done a little arrow to show the Underrepresented Communities Survey. It'll go there. So it will be available for anybody to take a look at and access and, learn from. Again, if you want to do walking tours or other educational pieces or what have you, it is publicly available information. And sorry for the pixelation there. To close up, that's my contact information. Although I will say it has my office phone, and if you are one of the people who has recently called and attempted to leave me a voicemail, you'll know that my voicemail says that I'm largely not checking my voicemail and available by email. As with many city employees, and certainly the vast majority of the planning division, I am right now working from home and largely available by email. But for people who need to verbally talk through something with me, we are setting up Zoom meetings, which people can call into, but we can also do a face-to-face meeting just like we're doing right now, or virtual face-to-face. But so that's the information that I have for part 1 of our Underrepresented Communities Survey. As I said, we are seeing this as a living document as we gather together information. The survey's been out to a variety of stakeholder groups to get information. Even with that, I'm fully expecting we will find things that we didn't get quite right. And so if people notice those things, please say something. I would much rather have things corrected and be able to correct the living document that we're going to have up on our website than hold with, well, we published it and here's where it is. Updating the information, getting more complete information is very much a priority. So that's what I've got.
All right, thank you, Heather. Wow, that was fascinating. Okay, so I will just give me 1 second here, and I will. Okay, so now you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask Heather a question.
Hi, Heather. This is Carolyn Frywald, and I'm talking to you from 1442 Williamson Street, and I'm wondering if Jason got information about Ted Pierce's house.
Oh,
I'll show you the mural if I can put the light on for you. I'm in it right now. If you can see that behind me.
Yeah.
He liked to paint inside of his house a lot.
That's amazing.
I know. It's from 1952. I guess they had a dedication.
Yeah.
At least that's what his friends had said.
So I'm not connected to the city's server right now because me connecting to Zoom will eat up its bandwidth. So I'm not connected to the full underrepresented community survey. So I don't know off the top of my head, but Jason will be the next person to speak. So I'm reading from a report that was already prepared. He's got that, in-depth knowledge because he was knee-deep in both doing the survey and doing the research. He'll be able to tell you which properties he surveyed.
Yeah, I wrote a report on it, but I can't find it because it was in grad school. So I was supposed to give it to him and I never did, but I'll stop talking now and just check in with him later.
Well, I will say, if you find that, I would love to have it and add it to the preservation file.
I definitely will. I just have to wait for the university to open back up and open up an old computer and like that kind of thing.
Yep,
So
I hear you. I hear you.
Okay, Heather, we've got one question in the chat. When will the report be available on the website?
Hopefully super soon. Like I said, I literally just today signed off on the deliverables. Went by the office, picked up the mailing, looked through what we had. So we will begin the process immediately of getting it up and available, because we've signed off on it, so it is ready to go live. But I'm not the person who will be adding it to the website, so I can't speak to that person's timeline. But I will say it's a priority for us to get it out there. This will be happening shortly.
Great. Have we got any other questions for Heather? So we got another one in the chat here. What are some of the identified properties that are already on the potential landmark list?
And so, yeah, again, I didn't pull up the full resource survey here. Just pulled out the couple of properties that I'm intending to highlight. You know, and I should say, while the survey identifies properties that could be potential landmarks, I would not advise people to read this as sort of a hit list of, and now we're going to swoop in and boom, 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 make these things landmarks. I very much want to work with property owners. If a property owner wants their property to be a landmark, fantastic. Let's work with them. One of the things I see having as a result of this survey is we've got the research there. If someone isn't aware of the history associated with their property, then we have it here. If they are aware of the history, but they don't have the time to pull it all together, we've got it here now. If you want to avail yourself of the property protections that come with a local landmark designation, then we can help you with that, and that information is there available for you. Yeah, otherwise I would encourage people to scroll through the full survey report and the various attachments with that. It's long, it's 244 pages. There's a lot of information in there. And it's, again, we're talking about making sure that this is a living document. So hopefully we will be adding to it over time.
Great. We've got another question in the chat. Are there hard copies of the CHPP available?
No. Shifting to the trying to be a little bit more sustainable and renewable, it's going to be electronically available. Like I said, it is 244 pages, and we didn't order any prints. So no, I don't have any hard copies available. They will be available as a PDF. If you would like to print out parts of it or all of it, you are welcome to do so.
Another question, how are the members of these communities consulted as part of the survey?
So the consultants, we largely hired consultants to complete the survey. And so you'll hear from Jason Tisch for the part 2. He was one of the consultants doing some of the research here. We did a lot of things. So the consultant team went out and did personal interviews with some members of the community. And with that, when you're doing these types of interviews, you go and you talk with somebody and they say, you should really talk with so-and-so too. And so that leads to another person. We also sent out emails to the organizations that are really active in these, particular communities to say, hey, we're doing this survey and we're trying to gather together information. And it's a lot of just reaching out and connecting with people. The Historic Preservation Plan Advisory Committee was a 13-member committee. And one of the goals with creating that committee was making sure it was diverse, that the membership on the committee would reflect the communities that we were attempting to identify and make sure they were no longer underrepresented in our record. So by having people who were members of those communities, a part of the HBPAC, that also we had somebody, you know, on the inside of this process, able to see what we were doing and go back and talk with their communities and establish those connections. So I would say it was a multi-layered process. And then we had a bunch of public meetings and electronically available survey, press releases, lots of stuff going out there. So again, I'll go back to one of the things with having this as a living document, though, is I'm not saying we are done with our research. It's not that with these 6 communities, we have completed the sum total of everything we need to know about the African American community, that we have done an initial pass. And we are hoping that we will be able to continue to learn more.
Okay. All right. There's another question. Is there any hope of preserving and creating something like an interpretive center around the Hill Grocery site?
I would be incredibly supportive of that. That property is a designated city landmark. We are very much advocates for its preservation and support, and we have been working with the Hill family to talk about options for the long term for this property. And I would say those discussions are ongoing. If there could be something else to transform that property, fantastic. The city would love to be able to support that.
Great. Okay. Any more questions? Had some good questions so far.
Yes. Well, if nobody's gonna, and then if nobody's gonna ask questions, then I'll talk more. Because I know what I'm talking. We are very excited about this survey. We've had a lot of good feedback from individuals and organizations about the survey. This is the first survey of its kind by any municipality in the state, and we're hoping that other communities do this as well. And also that this can build momentum for being able to diversify our historic record and also diversify the type of work that the preservation program does. Get back into the more educational outreach was something that we used to be very active in, and hopefully we can be active in again.
Great. We do have one more question asking if there will be walking tours.
Well, I mean, if there will be walking tours, I won't be doing them. I am a staff of one between the Landmarks Commission and additional projects. I don't necessarily have time to develop any walking tours. However, if an organization like the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation wanted to develop thematic tours related to this information, boy, we would be super excited if you did that.
That is a terrific idea. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Thank you, Heather, for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Giving such interesting information and a lot of things to think about. We can, maybe you can let us know and we can send an email to everyone when the post is up.
Absolutely.
And so we can let all you guys know that it's good to go and you can go to the link. We can try to take you as direct as we can to that link. And we have our part 2 coming up next Wednesday with Jason. So if you haven't RSVP'd for that, we'd love it if you join us for that part. And part 3 is coming. So we'll have that out to you guys soon.
And to do an additional plug for Jason's part, having worked with him on this project, and anybody who's worked with him will know, he's a really great researcher and he tells a good story. He writes a good history. So I would encourage you to check into his presentation because he'll be able to tell you the story of these communities from the side of the person who has the deep knowledge of having completed the research and written the histories.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think that's it for
everyone.
us. So thanks everyone for joining us, and everyone have a good evening, and we hope to see you next Wednesday.
Great. Thanks.